I looked around, but I couldn't make out anything, and I couldn't figure out the direction the noise was from either. The noise sort of stopped for a minute, and they was only twilight and trees, still as death. Then the noise started again, nearer and louder, sounding like a lot of people running or walking all at once, moving this way, twigs busting under feet and scrabbling in the bushes, all mixed up in the noise. I scrunched down behind that boulder and kept real quiet. I can tell that whatever makes the noise, it's real close now, right in the glen. I want to look up, but doesn't, because the sound is so loud and mean. And also there is an awful smell like something that was dead and buried, being uncovered again in the sun. All at once, the noise stops, and again I can tell that whatever makes it is real close by. For a minute, the woods are creepy still. Then comes the sound. It's a voice. And it's not a voice. That is, it doesn't sound like a voice, but more like buzzing or croaking, deep and droning. But it has to be a voice, because it is saying words. Not words, but I could understand, but words. Words that made me keep my head down, half afraid I might be seen, and half afraid I might see something. I stayed there, sweating and shaking. The smell was making me pretty sick, but that awful, deep droning voice was worse, saying over and over something like, "Ea, shub, nigger ath, naga, yila, neb, shogoth." I can't hope to spell it out the way it sounded, but I heard it enough times to remember. I was still listening when the smell got awful thick, and I guess I must have fainted, because when I woke up, the voice was gone and it was getting quite dark. I ran all the way home that night, but not before I saw where the thing had stood when it talked, and it was a thing. No human being can leave tracks in the mud like goats' hooves, all green with slime, that smell awful. Not 4 or 8, but a couple hundred. I didn't tell Aunt Lucy or Uncle Fred, but that night when I went to bed, I had terrible dreams. I thought I was back in the glen, only this time I could see the thing. It was real tall and all inky black, without any particular shape, except a lot of black ropes with ends like hooves on it. I mean, it had a shape, but it kept changing, all bulgy and squirming into different sizes. They was a lot of mouths all over the thing, like puckered up leaves on branches. That's as close as I can come. The mouths was like leaves, and the whole thing was like a tree in the wind, a black tree with lots of branches trailing the ground, and a whole lot of roots ending in hooves, and that green slime dribbling out of the mouths down the legs was like a sap. Now, some people, when they encounter jinn, are going to experience smells and other things that aren't physically there, but that doesn't mean they aren't there. Of course, this all is fiction, but you know what I mean. And they can affect the dreams. Next day, I remembered to look in a book Aunt Lucy had downstairs. It was called A Mythology. This book told about some people who lived over in England and France in the old days. It was called Druids. They worshipped trees and thought they was alive. Maybe this thing was like what they worshipped, called a nature spirit. But these Druids lived across the ocean, so how could it be? I did a lot of thinking about it in the next couple days, and you can bet I didn't go out to play in those woods again. At last, I figured it out, something like this. Maybe those Druids got chased out of the forests over in England and France, and some of them was smart enough to build boats and come across the ocean, like old Leif Erikson is supposed to have. Then they could maybe settle in the woods back here and frighten away the Indians with their magic spells. They would know how to hide themselves away in the swamps and go right on with their heathen worshipping and call up these spirits out of the ground or whatever they come from. Now, if people have woven homes, they have woven homes. That doesn't really, whatever their religion, but pagan and heathen, the Romans used it for just the people who had different sorts of homes and stuff. It had nothing to do with, they're these pagans out there, these Gentiles, the Romans didn't speak like that. So Christians using it as an insult is... Indians used to believe that white entities came out of the sea a long time ago. What if that was just another way of telling how the Druids got here? Some real civilized Indians down in Mexico or South America, Aztecs or Incas, I guess, said a white entity came over in a boat and taught them all kinds of magic. Couldn't he have been a Druid? That would explain Grandma's stories about them once too. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints says it was, Hebrews or Babylonians and stuff like that. But we're talking brown-skinned people. They're talking white man. So if they come from about the same latitude, they wouldn't have been white. They wouldn't have been dark, If they came, like in the 30s, for example, down in Florida is like around Jerusalem latitude, so they would have been about the same color. Just simple logic. Even proof points out that we're talking about dark-skinned people. That would explain Grandma's stories about them once too. Those Druids hiding in the swamps would be the ones who did the drumming and pounding and lit the fires on the hills, and they would be calling up them once, the tree spirits or whatever, out of the earth. Then they would make sacrifices. Those Druids always made sacrifices with blood, just like the old witches. And didn't Grandma tell about people who lived too near the hills, disappearing and never be found again? They do find ogams and runes dating back before even the migrations of the Muslimin into America, starting the 700s of the Common Era. So so the Druids is what makes sense. The Bible describes Jesus as being brown-skinned and having black woolly hair, so... We lived in a spot just exactly like that, and it was getting close to Halloween. That was the big time, Grandma always said. I began to wonder how soon now. Got so scared I didn't go out of the house. Aunt Lucy made me take a tonic, said I looked peaked. Guess I did. All I know is that one afternoon when I heard a buggy coming through the woods, I ran and hid under the bed, but it was only Cat Pritchett with the mail. Uncle Fred got it and come in all excited with a letter. Cousin Osborne was coming to stay with us. He was akin to Aunt Lucy and he had a vacation. He wanted to stay a week. He'd get here on the same train I did. The only train that was passing through these parts on noon, October 25th. Now, I don't know why he didn't. It doesn't really add to the story, not using as good of English. For the next few days, we was all so excited that I forgot all my crazy notions for a spell. Uncle Fred fixed up the back room for Cousin Osborne to sleep in, and I helped him with the carpenter parts of the job. I'm going to, automatically correct some of this as I go along, not thinking. So, it's worse than what I'm saying in parts. Days got shorter right along, and nights was all cold with big winds. It was pretty brisk in the morning of the 25th, and Uncle Fred bundled up warm to drive through the woods. He meant to fetch Cousin Osborne at noon, and it was 7 miles to the station. He wouldn't take me, and I didn't beg. Those woods were too full of creaking and rustling sounds from the wind, sounds that might be something else too. When he left, and Aunt Lucy and I stayed in the house, she was putting up preserves now, plums for over the winter season. I washed out jars from the well. Seems like I should have told about them having 2 wells, a new one with a big shiny pump close to the house, then an old stone one out by the barn with the pump gone. It never had been any good, Uncle Fred said. It was there when they bought the place. Water was all slimy, something funny about it, because even without a pump, sometimes it seemed to back up. Uncle Fred couldn't figure it out, but some mornings water would be running out all over the sides, green, slimy water that smelled terrible. We kept away from it, and I was by the new well till along about noon, when it started to cloud up. Aunt Lucy fixed lunch, and it started to rain hard, with thunder rolling in off the big hills in the west. Seemed to me Uncle Fred and Cousin Osborne was going to have troubles getting home in the storm, but Aunt Lucy didn't fret about it, just made me help her put up the stock. Come 5 o'clock, getting dark, and still no Uncle Fred. Then we begun to worry. Maybe the train was late or something happened to the horse or buggy. 6 o'clock and still no Uncle Fred. The rain stopped, but you could still hear the thunder sort of growling off in the hills, and the wet branches kept dripping down in the woods, making a sound like women laughing. Maybe the road was too bad for them to get through. Buggy might bog down in the mud. Perhaps they decided to stay in the depot overnight. 7 o'clock, and it was pitch dark outside. No rain sounds anymore. Aunt Lucy was awful worried. She said for us to go out and post a lantern on the fence rail by the road. We went down the path to the fence. It was dark, and the wind had died down. Everything was still, like in the deep part of the woods. I felt kind of scared just walking down the path with Aunt Lucy, like something was out there in the quiet dark, someplace waiting to grab me. We lit the lantern and stood there looking down the dark road, and "What's that?" said Aunt Lucy, real sharp. I listened and heard a drumming sound far away. "Horse and buggy," I said. Aunt Lucy perked up. "You're right," she says, all at once. And it is, because we see it. The horse is running fast, and the buggy lurches behind it, crazy-like. It don't even take a second look to see something has happened, because the buggy didn't stop by the gate, but keeps going up to the barn, with Aunt Lucy and me running through the mud after the horse. The horse is full of lather and foam. When it stops up, it can't stand still. Aunt Lucy and I wait for Uncle Fred and Cousin Osborne to step out, but nothing happens. We look inside. There isn't anybody in the buggy at all. Aunt Lucy says, "Oh," in a real loud voice, and then faints. I had to carry her back to the house and get her into the bed. I waited almost all night by the window, but Uncle Fred and Cousin Osborne never showed up. Never. The next few days was awful. There was nothing in the buggy for a clue like to what happened, and Aunt Lucy wouldn't let me go along the road into town or even to the station through the woods. The next morning the horse was dead in the barn, and of course we would have had to walk to the depot, or all those miles to Warren's farm. Aunt Lucy was scared to go and scared to stay, and she allowed as how, when Cap Pritchett comes by, we had best go with him over to town and make a report, and then stay there until we found out what happened. Me, I had my own ideas what happened. Halloween was only a few days away now, and maybe them ones had snatched Uncle Fred and Cousin Osborne for sacrifice. Them ones are druids. The mythological book said the druids could even raise storms if they wanted to with their spells. Now, Stonehenge and other places indicate that the pre-Christian groups didn't celebrate Halloween. They celebrated Samhain, which happened the week after. Starting the, basically Samhain was their name for not only that night, but the season to follow. And that would have been at the cross quarter night, not Halloween. A lot of Christian holidays like St. John's Day isn't the solstice. Candlemas isn't the start of the spring quarter. Various things. But just a little bit off of the natural ones. Usually before, because they want people to spend their money on the Christian holidays, could have been the original intention. No sense talking to Aunt Lucy, though. She was like out of her head with worry anyway. Just rocking back and forth and mumbling over and over, "They're gone," and Fred always warned me. No use, no use. I'd got to get meals and tend to stock myself. And nights, it was hard to sleep, because I kept listening for drums. I never heard any, though. But still, it was better than sleeping and having those dreams. Dreams about the black thing, like a tree, walking through the woods and sort of rooting itself to no one particular spot, so that it could pray with all those mouths, pray down to that old entity in the ground below. Well, a real God would be omnipresent, right? I don't know where I got the idea that was how it prayed, by sort of attaching its mouths to the ground. Maybe it was on account of seeing the green slime, or had I really seen it? I'd never gone back to look. Maybe it was all in my head, the Druid story, and about them ones, and the voice that said Shoggoth, and all the rest. But then, where was Cousin Osborne and Uncle Fred? And what scared the horse so it up and died the next day? Thoughts kept going round and round in my head, chasing each other. But all I knew was we'd be out here by Halloween night, because Halloween was on a Thursday, and Cap Pritchett would come, and we could ride to town with him. Night before, I made Aunt Lucy pack, and we got all ready, and then I settled down to sleep. There was no noises, and for the first time I felt a little better. Only the dreams come again. I dreamt a bunch of men come in the night, and crawled through the parlor bedroom window where Aunt Lucy slept and got her. They tied her up and took her away all quiet in the dark, because they had cat eyes and didn't need light to see. The dream scared me, so I woke up while it was just breaking into dawn. I went down the hall to Aunt Lucy right away. She was gone. The window was wide open like in my dream, and some of the blankets were torn. The ground was hard outside the window, and I didn't see footprints or anything, but she was gone. I guess I cried then. It's hard to remember what I did next. Didn't want breakfast. Went out hollering, Aunt Lucy, not expecting any answer. I walked to the barn, and the door was open, and the cows were gone. Saw one or two prints going out to the yard and up the road, but I didn't think it was safe to follow them. Some time later, I went over the well, and then I cried again, because the water was all slimy green and the new one just like the old, and I saw that I knew I was right. Those ones must come in the night, and they weren't even trying to hide their doings anymore, like they were sure of things. Tonight was Halloween. I had to get out of here. If those ones were watching and waiting, I couldn't depend on Cap Pritchett showing up this afternoon. I'd have to chance it down the road, and I better start walking now in the morning, while it was still light enough to make town. So, I rummaged around and found a little money in Uncle Fred's drawer of the bureau. Cousin Osborne's letter with the address in Kingsport he wrote it from. That's where I'd have to go after I told folks in town what happened. I'd have some kin there. And importantly enough, it's what I'm thinking. Among the Native Americans is, and by that I mean the American continents, in their mythology is that demons coming in cat form to people. Sometimes they're not labeled as demons, but they're beings that suggest things and give ideas of auspicious times or situations for things that people would generally consider to be evil. I wondered if they'd believe me now in town when I told them about the way Uncle Fred had disappeared Aunt Lucy, and about them stealing the cattle for a sacrifice, and about the green slime in the well, where something had stopped to drink. I wondered if they would know about the drums and the light on the hills tonight, and if they was going to get up a party and come back this evening and try to catch them ones, and what they meant to call up, rumbling out of the earth. I wondered if they knew what a shoggoth was. Well, whether they did or not, I could stay and find out for myself. So I packed up my satchel and got ready to leave. Must have been around noon, and everything was still. I went to the door and stepped outside, not bothering to lock it behind me. Why should I, with nobody around for miles? Then I heard the noise down the road. Footsteps, somebody walking along the road just around the bend. I stood for a minute, waiting to see, waiting to run. Then he came along. He was tall and thin and looked something like Uncle Fred, only a lot younger and without a beard, and he was wearing a nice city kind of suit and a crush hat. He smiled when he saw me and come marching, like he knowed who I was. "Hello, Willie," he said. I didn't say nothing. I was so confused. "Don't you know me?" he said. "I'm Cousin Osborne, your Cousin Frank." He held out his hand to shake. "But I guess you wouldn't remember, would you? Last time I saw you, you were only a baby." "But I thought you were supposed to come last week," I said. "We expected you on the 25th. "Didn't you get my telegram?" he said. "I had business." I shook my head. "We never get nothing here, unless the mail delivers it on Thursdays. Maybe it's at the station." Cousin Osborne grinned. "You were pretty well off the beaten track at that. Nobody at the station this noon. But I was hoping Fred would come along with the buggy, so that I wouldn't have to walk, but no luck." "You walked all the way?" I asked. "That's right." "And you come on the train?" Cousin Osborne nodded. "Then, where's your suitcase?" "I left it at the depot," he told me. "Too far to fetch it along. I thought Fred would drive me back there in the buggy to pick it up." He noticed my luggage for the first time. "But wait a minute. Where are you going with the suitcase, son?" Well, there was nothing else for me to do but tell him everything that happened. So I said for him to come into the house and sit down, and I'd explain. We went back in, and he fixed some coffee, and I made a couple sandwiches, and we ate. And then I told him about Uncle Fred going to the depot and not coming back, and about the horse, and then what happened to Aunt Lucy. I left out the part about me in the woods, of course, and I didn't even hint at them once. But I told him I was scared and figured on walking to town today before dark. Cousin Osborne, he listened to me, nodding and not saying much or interrupting. "Now you can see why we got to go right away," I said. "Whatever come after them will be coming after us, and I don't want to spend another night here." Cousin Osborne stood up. "You may be right, Willie," he said, "but don't let your imagination run away with you, son. Try to separate fact from fancy. Your aunt and uncle have disappeared, that's fact. But this other nonsense about things in the woods coming after you, that's fancy. It reminds me of all that silly talk I heard back home in Arkham, and for some reason there seems to be more of it around this time of year, at Halloween. Why, when I left." "Excuse me, Cousin Osborne," I said, "but don't you live in Kingsport?" "Why, to be sure," he told me. "But I did live in Arkham once, and I know the people around here. It's no wonder you were so frightened in the woods and got to imagining things. As it is, I admire your bravery for a 12-year-old. You've acted very sensibly." "Then let's start walking," I said. "Here it is almost 2, and we better get moving if we want to make the town before sundown." "Not just yet, son. Cousin Osborne said I wouldn't feel right about leaving without looking around and seeing what we can discover about this mystery. After all, you must understand that we can't just march into town and tell the sheriff some wild nonsense about strange creatures in the woods making off with your aunt and uncle. Sensible folks just won't believe such things. They might think I was lying and laugh at me. Why, they might even think you had something to do with your aunt and uncle's, well, leaving." "Please," I said. "We got to go right now." He shook his head. I didn't say any more. I might have told him a lot about what I dreamed and heard and saw and knew, but I figured it was no use. Besides, there were some things I didn't want to say to him now that I had talked to him. I was feeling scared again. First he said he was from Arkham, and then, when I asked him, he said he was from Kingsport, but it sounded like a lie to me. Then he said something about me being scared in the woods, and how could he know that? I never told him that part at all. If you want to know what I really thought, I thought maybe he wasn't really Cousin Osborne at all. And if he wasn't, then who was he? I stood up and walked back into the hall. Where are you going, son? He asked. Outside. I'll come with you. Sure enough, he was watching me. He wasn't going to let me out of his sight. He came over and took my arm, real friendly, but I couldn't break loose. No. He hung on to me. He knew I meant to run for it. What could I do? All alone in the house, in the woods, with this man, with night coming on, Halloween night, and them ones out there waiting. We went outside, and I noticed it was getting dark already, even in the afternoon. Clouds had covered up the sun, and the wind was moving the trees so that they stretched out their branches, like they was trying to hold me back. They made a rustling sound, just as if they were whispering things about me. And he sort of looked up at them and listened. Maybe he understood what they were saying. Maybe they were giving him orders. Then I almost laughed because he was listening to something, and now I heard it too. It was a drumming sound on the road. Cap Pritchett, I said. He's the mailman. Now we can ride to town with him in the buggy. Let me talk to him, he says. About your aunt and uncle. No sense in alarming him, and we don't want any scandal, do we? You just run along inside. But Cousin Osborne, I said, we got to tell the truth. Of course, son, but this is a matter for adults. Now run along, I'll call you. You know, back then, a 12-year-old wasn't expected to hit puberty. Of course, 12 was older in the story, and he's going back, isn't he? So it could have been younger, even. Of course, son. Well, he was real polite about it and even smiled. But, all the same, he dragged me back up the porch and into the house and slammed the door. I stood there in the dark hall, and I could hear Cap Pritchett slow down and call out to him, and him going up to the buggy and talking, and then all I heard was a lot of mumbling, real low. I peeked out through a crack in the door and saw them. Cap Pritchett was talking to him friendly, all right, and nothing was wrong, except that in a minute or so, Cap Pritchett waved, and then he grabbed the reins and the buggy and started off again. Then I knew I'd have to do it. No matter what happened, I opened the door and ran out, suitcase and all, down the path, up the road after the buggy. Cousin Osborne, he tried to grab me when I went out, but I ducked around him and yelled, Wait for me, Cap, I'm coming. Take me to town. Cap slowed and stared back, real puzzled. Willie? He says. Why, I thought you was gone. He said you went away with Fred and Lucy. Pay no attention, I said. He didn't want me to go. Take me to town. I'll tell you what really happened. Please, Cap. You got to take me. Sure, I'll take you, Willie. Hop right up here. I hopped. Cousin Osborne, come right up to the buggy. Here now, he said, real sharp. You can't leave like this. I forbid it. You're in my custody. Don't listen to him, I yelled. Take me, Cap, please. Very well, said Cousin Osborne. If you insist on being unreasonable, we'll all go. I cannot permit you to leave alone. He smiled at Cap. You can see the boy is unstrung, he said, and I trust you will not be disturbed by his imaginings. Living out here like this? Well, you understand. He's not quite himself. I'll explain everything on the way to town. He sort of shrugged at Cap and made signs of tapping his head. Then he smiled again and made me to climb up next to us in the buggy seat. But Cap didn't smile back. No, you didn't. No, you don't, he said. This boy Willie is a good boy. I know him. I don't know you. Looks as if you'd done enough explaining already, mister, when he said Willie had gone away. But I merely wanted to avoid talk, you see. I've been called into the doctor. The boy. He's mentally unstable. Stables be damned, Cap spit out some tobacco juice right at Cousin Osborne's feet. We're going. Cousin Osborne stopped smiling. Then I insist you take me with you, he said, and he tried to climb into the buggy. Cap reached into his jacket, and when he pulled his hand out again. He had a big pistol in it. "Get down," he yelled. "Mister, you're talking to the United States mail. And you don't tell the government nothing, understand? Now get down before I mess your brains all over this road." Cousin Osborne scowled, but he got away from the buggy fast. Yeah, don't lie to government. Keep quiet, but don't lie. He looked at me and shrugged. "You're making a big mistake, Willie," he said. I didn't even look at him. Cap said, "Gee up," and we went off down the road. The buggy wheels turned faster and faster. Pretty soon the farmhouse was out of sight, and Cap put his pistol away and patted me on the shoulder. "Stop that trembling, Willie," he said. "You're safe now. Nothing to worry about. Be in town a little over an hour or so. Now you've just sit back and tell old Cap all about it." So I told him. It took a long time. We kept going through the woods, and before I knew it, it was almost dark. The sun sneaked down and hid behind the hills. The dark began to creep out of the woods on each side of the road, and the trees started to rustle, whispering to the big shadows that followed us. The horse was clipping and clopping along, and pretty soon there were other noises from far away. Might have been thunder, might have been something else, but it was getting nighttime for sure, and it was the night of Halloween. Now, there are people who blaspheme Halloween, as Halloween being an All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day being Christian holidays. And even those who enact the Christian claims about other cults. The road cut off through the hills now, and you could hardly see where the next turn would take you. Besides, it was getting dark awful fast. "Guess we're in for a spell of rain," Cap said, looking up. "That's thunder, I reckon." "Drums," I said. "Drums? At night in the hills? You can hear them," I told him. "I heard them all this month. It's them ones getting ready for the Sabbath." "Sabbath?" Cap looked at me. "Where you hear tell about a Sabbath?" Then I told him some more about what had happened. I told him all the rest. He didn't say anything, and before long he couldn't have answered me anyways, because the thunder was all around us, and the rain was lashing down on the buggy, on the road, everywhere. It was pitch black outside now, and the only time we could see was when the lightning flashed. I had to yell to make him hear me, yell about the things that caught Uncle Fred and come for Aunt Lucy, the things that took our cattle, and then sent